Is it a brat summer if you feel extremely overwhelmed and also your credit card was compromised? I'm not overwhelmed in the least, not at all, which is also why this video is late. I do apologize. I hate summer. I don't like to be hot. It's not fun. I'm wearing a Miu Miu today. It's like just one long dress because that is literally all I have the patience for. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Catherine and I'm here to talk about books. Welcome to my July wrap-up. So this is all the books that I've read in the month of July. It was a great reading month for me, even though I was stressed out. I've read 5 books. I have 4 here, and then I read 1 audiobook. And it was a great month. I read some really great stuff. I want to chat, I want to talk about it. First, I read for my book club. I haven't been able to go to this book club for so long, but then I finally was like, no, July, I'm going. We read Elizabeth Bowen's The Heat of the Day. This was published in the 40s. I've never read any Elizabeth Bowen before, and the group was so interesting because there were some people who were like, oh, I love Elizabeth Bowen, I love her, I've read everything that she's done, obsessed, and then a lot of us were like, no, I've never read her. There was one member of the group who was like, this is the first Elizabeth Bowen book I've read, and this will be the last Elizabeth Bowen book I've ever read. Some people were not fans of this. This book... Look, I don't consider myself a genius. I don't have a degree in this. I just like to read, and I consider myself a pretty strong reader. But this was a challenging book. Like, I found this to be really difficult. The prose in this is really decadent and really dense. A lot of it is very poetic, but then when characters have conversations with each other, they aren't exactly poetic. They often will say things in non sequiturs and say things that don't really seem like they mean anything, but they really do mean something else. So everything is kind of indirect when characters talk to each other, which makes deciphering what they actually mean to say really hard. And I consider myself someone who can pick up on subtext, who can mine for what people actually mean, both in reading and in real life. But this was like expert level. Like, you had to really dig and read between the lines, and it made it so challenging that it wasn't enjoyable. I know this is one of her later works, so I think this is when she was really getting into her own style and really starting to push the envelope a bit in terms of how her prose can go. She's, I think, more well known for her books called The Death of the Heart and The Last September. And from the people who loved Bowen in this group, they were like, those ones are a little bit more accessible, and I would actually say you should start with those rather than this one, because this one, again, is when she's really evolved in her style. And sort of like how Virginia Woolf started a little bit more accessible, but then she went more and more experimental and leaned more into the stream of consciousness by the end of her career. It's a similar kind of thing here. The front of the book says, imagine a Graham Greene thriller projected through the sensibility of Virginia Woolf, which I find interesting. I've never read any Graham Greene, but I know that he has very readable books, very readable thriller books. And then through the sensibility of Virginia Woolf, meaning like it goes into the interior of people's minds, a little bit stream of consciousness, a little bit going a little bit abstracted. That part of it I could understand. I just didn't really connect with this book. I thought I would. The beginning of this book got me. It was so interesting. Wait a minute. I should probably explain the plot. This takes place during the Second World War. Stella, who's our main character, is working for the government, which can be kind of implied that she is doing some kind of spy work, and she's in this relationship with this man who's also doing spy work. So they're these 2 spies, but you don't really think they're working together, or maybe they're not working together. And there's this 3rd man involved named Harrison, who basically brings this information to Stella. He's like, hey, Robert, that spy you're sleeping with, he's a spy for the Germans. He's a counter spy. And I won't do anything about that if you sleep with me. So Harrison's like, I'm also a little bit of a spy, and going to this woman spy and saying, your boyfriend spy is spying for the Germans. I won't say anything if you sleep with me. Ew, that's gross. And she doesn't like Harrison. She's like, F off, that's gross. But then as she's thinking about it and as she's gelling it over and all these other events sort of start happening, it plants a seed of doubt. And it then makes the relationship between her and Robert very strained and very interesting. And then there's just other things thrown in here. Stella's son, who is in the war, comes to visit, and there's all these little things in it that I was a little bit like, why is it here? There's this whole other character named Louie, who's this woman, and she serves as kind of a contrast to Stella. Stella is very poised, she's very clever, she's very put together, but not very emotional on the outside. And Louie is very like, very open. She's like, she just wants to connect with people. She kind of sleeps around because she misses her husband who's at the war. Whoa. But whenever they flashed over to Louis, I was like, I get that this is supposed to be serving as a contrast to Stella, but I don't know what the point is. I'm kind of just going, I don't really get why she's here, and I don't really need her to be here. And even when they were talking about and like alluding to spy things, it was, again, the subtext was just so heavy that you'd almost miss it. And so I found I had to like reread pages over and over again. The beginning of this book was gorgeous. There's this beginning scene where it's all these people in London who are going to see an outdoor concert. And the way she describes the atmosphere, the way she describes how tense everything is, because it's after the Blitz, after the huge London Blitz. And so everyone is like a little on edge, a little lonely, but also like wanting to seek some kind of normalcy by going to this outdoor concert. And so the way she sets that scene, I was like reading it on a plane and I was like, wow, this is so good. But then as it starts to get into the actual plot and it gets into the conversations with Stella and Robert, I was like, oh, I'm bored. And I'm like, I'm really confused, but not in like a fun, ooh, this is like a fun puzzle. I was more just like, I'm bored. Like, I had probably about 70 pages left of this book and I was just like, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Again, I don't think I'm smart enough. There was someone in our group who came to this talk who was like, taught at Rutgers University, where my parents are alums, which is cool. But she taught an English class and like taught specifically on Bowen. So I was like, well, we got someone who like knows her writing and like really loves it and can vouch for it. But then the rest of us in the group were like, this was fine. We were not super into it. I gave it 3 stars, mostly because there were passages that were so beautiful and so poetic. But anytime it came to characters talking, she lost me. I just didn't like it. So I would not recommend this. I am gonna maybe try The Death of the Heart and or The Last September, but I am not going to prioritize it. I'm definitely going to read a lot of other authors and other books before I pick up anything by her again. I might unhaul it because I didn't enjoy this at all. So not a strong start to the to the month, but yeah, we did it. We still did it. The next was also, I was reading these 2 books at the same time, and I was like, yo. Interesting reads, but too dense. Like, both of these were really dense, and I didn't expect it to be, especially because I thought Death of the Heart wasn't going to be as dense as it was. But then I picked up this one, and I was like, jeez, I'm reading some, like, really heavy books right now. Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. This was intense. This was an intense book, but very, very well written and very good. This is Galeano's account of how the region of Latin America has basically been exploited through colonialism and through imperialism, and he traces it through the resources that Latin America has. Latin America was very rich and very dense and had a lot of natural materials at their disposal. They had gold, they had copper, they had silver, they had rubber, they had all of these materials, and basically he shows how Latin America is the way it is, which at the time this was written in the 70s, so Latin America is the way it is now in the 70s because these other nations have taken advantage of the regions and the people living there for their own wealth, and it has decimated the populations in these countries. And which is, that concept I think is fascinating, because you could take it through country by country, or you could take it by ruling country and show it that way, but the fact that he made it very clear that it was about the resources, I found fascinating, because I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And this was very interesting. I thought it was going to be more narrative. I don't know if I read that somewhere, or other people who have read this said it was narrative. I didn't really find it narrative. I think maybe because people were saying it's just so well written that it almost feels like a literary experience, that's why I thought it was. Because it wasn't narrative. This felt very much like chapter by chapter, section by section. It was like fact, 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 fact. Okay, we're moving on to the next country and the next resource. Fact, 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 fact. The amount of facts now I know about the Cuba sugar trade is a lot. And it made this then a little dense. If I was doing some kind of thesis or doing some kind of paper on resources in Latin America or a very specific country in Latin America, this would be a fantastic source. He obviously knows his stuff, and it was incredibly knowledgeable and interesting. But the writing style, I was like, okay, it's a lot. And it also was just heavy. Like, it was just very sad to me and like very heavy, because so many of these people These were countries that, the countries themselves, if they nationalized their resources and or took advantage of the resources they had and weren't completely crushed by colonialism, these countries would be some of the most wealthy in the world. They have some of the most valuable resources known to humankind. Because of colonialism and because of the oppressive forces of these countries, those countries are not the way they are now. I almost want like an addendum to this or another afterword to this, because this was published in the 70s, like the early 70s. And then there was an afterword called 7 Years Later, which I actually found to be one of the most interesting parts of the book, because it was Galeano now writing 7 years after the book was initially published and being like, oh wow, all this other stuff has happened, and it's just further proving my point. Like, the Chilean overthrow of the government has happened now, and there's so much to talk about. But even that is not contemporary enough. Like, I want to know now. Obviously, Galeano's not with us anymore, but I would like some kind of, like, response to this, or read some other response to this about our current economic situation now. Because I did feel, I'm like, this feels a little outdated. I mean, it's the 70s, and things either have come a long way or they have not come a long way. And I am not as up on that. Also because US news sources just don't present on anything that isn't relevant to us. We don't know anything about what's going on in other countries if it doesn't directly involve us, but I would want to know more. So this was really interesting. It was just very heavy, both in terms of content. It dealt a lot with human suffering. It was very heavy content, and also just like fact-wise. It also got very economical, which, you know, I should have predicted, because it's talking about resources. It's talking about how resources and materials were the thing that are driving the problems in Latin America. Obviously, that is pointing towards the fact that how they're traded and how they work in the given economies of these countries. So I was like, oh, we're reading a lot about markets. Oh, we're reading a lot about market value, things that go just a little over my head. So I did have to like reread a bunch and like have to really pour over it. So this took a lot longer to read than I thought. Again, I was like, I don't know why, I was like, let's give me a little narrative nonfiction read. No. I would say if you've never read nonfiction, I would not pick this one up. I would read a lot of nonfiction before you get to this, because this was definitely like nonfiction, baby, but still a worthwhile read, especially as someone who just visited Latin America, someone who would want to go back to visit Latin America. This just makes me really understand things and understand my position as a American coming to visit these countries. I just think it's important to know how exactly we've had a hand, because he had some words about the US, let me tell you, he had some words. I was actually reading this in a coffee shop, and a woman came up to me and she was like, oh my gosh, you're reading that book. Do you enjoy it? And I was like, yeah. She was telling me she had lived in Colombia for a while and was like doing, I think, stuff with the Peace Corps, or she was doing some kind of like volunteer research with them. She was like, I think more people need to read this book. Like, not enough people talk about this book and read it, but it's very good foundational knowledge if you want to go visit the region or be in the region. And I was like telling her about my trip and yada yada, but I just thought that was it. Like, I had it out and she was like, yes. And I was like, yes. I'm like, this is teaching me things I never knew and now can't unlearn and unknow, and can't help but feel just a little bit like, ugh. So if you are interested in Latin America, if you're interested in Latin American history, history of colonialism, history of slavery, history of just how the world functions, basically, this is good. I just would warn you, it's not narrative. It's very, very much fact, but very interesting read and definitely worthwhile. So very happy I read this. Up Advanced Latin America. Next was one I loved. I loved this book. I actually picked this from my First Lines of TBR video, which you should go watch that video if you haven't watched it. It was very fun. It's an idea that a subscriber gave to me that I should just read the first lines of books that I am looking to maybe read, and from the first lines decide if that's the book I want to read next. Because I was very stuck. I did not know. After those two dense reads, I was like, I don't know what I want, but I want something that's like maybe a little bit lighter. And so from that video, I picked Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. So this is a Polish book. This was written in 2009. This is like almost like a murder mystery noir, but very exceptionally well written with a very specific voice. So this tells the story of Janina. She's an older lady living in this like very remote Polish village. It's like outside of the city. She lives basically in the middle of nowhere. And one by one, her neighbors start just kind of dropping dead. And she is convinced she knows who killed them. And everyone else is kind of like, she's a little baddie, she's a little out there, she's kind of seen as an eccentric. But she's like, no, I know who is killing these people and I'm going to help solve it. And it's fascinating book. Really, really fascinating book. I devoured this because I loved Janina's voice. I thought she was such a specific character. She was so well fleshed out. I could tell Olga Tokarczuk like knew exactly who this woman was, and she was just so funny. Is that a little bug? Oh, it is a little bug. What are you doing in there? She just had a very specific voice. She was like a little bit of a cranky old lady, which I love those kind of characters. Like, I love the kind of cranky ladies. But she wasn't super cranky. I think she was just like, I kind of want to be left alone, and I also just want to kind of do my own thing over here. And I don't really care if no one gets it. I'm just gonna do my own thing. And the way that she viewed the world was very specific. She was very into astrology, and that's kind of how she aligned everything. Like, she was one of those people that was like, oh, well, Venus is in this position, so that's obviously why he's acting this way. Or if he knew that Mars is controlling his actions right now, he would think very differently. Like, that is how she views the world. A big part of this is her devotion to William Blake, the poet. She and an old student of hers like to translate Blake's poetry into Polish. And so a lot of the book, when she refers to things, she'll capitalize things. Like, for instance, referring to the police with a capital letter, she'll capitalize words that aren't usually capitalized. And at first I was like, why does she do this? And in a way I was like, oh, William Blake does that in his poetry a lot. Like, he will capitalize things that aren't usually done so, but it's almost to emphasize that word. So she did that a lot in this. She also, which I thought was so funny, she had a thing where she was like, if someone tells me a name, oftentimes their name doesn't match up with what they're like or who they are at all. I don't agree with the name that they give me, so I just rename them in my head. So the first neighbor that goes, like, winds up dead, we don't ever really know his real name. She only refers to him as Bigfoot. Like, she'll refer to that character to other characters. She'll be like, oh yeah, Bigfoot. And at one point they're like, yeah, you're right, he did have big feet. But like, she does that for everybody. And there's only one character that you meet a little later on where he says his name and she's like, that name makes sense. She doesn't like her own name either. She's like, do not call me that. Like, Janina is not my name, so I almost don't want to call her that in this book because she doesn't agree with it. So like, there's something with her with names, and it just makes this like very interesting character, and you just want to keep learning and reading to like get to know her and figure out like, what is this woman's deal? Like, what is going on? As you go, you're like, I kind of see what she's saying. She has a very specific theory about how these people are getting killed. But then when it gets to the very end and you find out what is actually causing the deaths, which I won't spoil, I kind of saw coming, but I was kind of like, oh shit, like I didn't think it was that, but oh. And that I think is just so indicative of Tokarczuk's style and her skill as a writer, because she kind of had it under our nose the whole time, but she was playing these other little games of deception, of misconstruing, and then being like, oh yeah, it was here all along. And I kind of suspected it, but I kind of didn't. But because the journey of the book was so enjoyable and so engaging, I just wasn't even really thinking about it until it was literally presented to me. The characters in this were really lovely. She had like her own little found family of people that she had. So the student that she has named Dizzy, she becomes close with. This man who is the character who she says, yeah, his name is appropriate for him, kind of comes to her house and stays there for a while. It's just this guy who like needs a place to stay. This woman who works at a thrift store that she names Good News. We don't ever learn her name, we just think her name is Good News, both capitalized. It creates this like, she has people who are looking out for her and who are invested in her. And so it makes this like little community while she's also figuring out these murders and trying to alert people to these murders. Again, like, the voice was just so specific and so masterfully done that it really made me love the writing in this. Like, I really did love the writing in this and how the plot was construed. So I will definitely be reading more Olga Tokarczuk in the future. The Books of Jacob are one that I really want to get into. I think there's one called Flight that I also really want to get into. I really love her work. She won the Nobel Prize. Makes sense. This was very well done. So if you like a little mystery book, if you like a very eccentric main character who might be a little unreliable, if you like a noir but you want it to be exceptionally well written and not necessarily like a hard-boiled detective novel, not to discredit those, but if you want something that's like of real literary merit, I would certainly recommend this book. I'm so happy I picked this one up. This was totally from that TBR video, like a gut feeling. I was like, the first line is so good. Actually, I'll read the first line for you if you want to just not watch that video. You don't have to watch that video. I am already at an age and additionally in a state where I must always wash my feet thoroughly before bed in the event of having to be removed by an ambulance in the night. Night being capitalized. You read that and you're like, that seems so cool. Like, why does she have to wash her feet? Don't know, but it's amazing. So, highly, highly recommend. Highly recommend Drive Your Plow with Bones of the Dead. I will be looking for more Olga in the future. Not like Elizabeth Bone. The next actually is a book that also was in that video, but I wasn't dazzled by the first line, but I was also like, I know I'm going to pick this up. Like, I know I'm going to pick it up very soon. It's been sitting on my mind to read it, but just not right now. But then as soon as I finished Drive Your Plow, I was like, all right, now we're doing it. It's The Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante. Whoa, this was one of those books where I finished it, I closed it, and I was sitting like this for a really long time. And to the point my boyfriend came over and he's like, are you okay? Are you good? And I was like, don't touch me. It's like, I need to be alone. It was one of those. Like, this book, for how short it is, hits you so hard, especially if you are a woman. This could hit you as a man too, but there was something about the womanhood of this book. Just the sheer feminine force of this book that was so much to take in such little time. So essentially, this book is about a woman living in Italy. It's contemporary, so this was written in 2002, so it's a contemporary Italian woman. She has a husband and she has 2 young children who I believe are at the ages of like 10 and 7. And her husband one day just tells her, I'm going to leave you. This isn't working out, I'm leaving. And he doesn't really provide her with anything, any explanation, any closure. He just pretty much leaves. And she's left with all these questions, and she's left with just the sheer weight of this man who she loved, who she's been in this committed relationship with, who she loves with her whole heart, just leaving her. Which that means the first third of this book was so terrifying to me. I'm not married, me and my partner are not married, but we're in a very committed relationship. And the thought of just one day my partner saying, I'm leaving. You thought everything was fine, but no, he's just going, I'm leaving. It doesn't give you anything, was so unbelievably scary to me. When I was reading this book and then me and my boyfriend would be like cooking or like sitting on the couch, I would just kind of be like looking at him like, would he do that to me? I was like, but then I was like, no, there's no way. Like, I definitely don't think that that would happen, but she didn't think so. And it was also terrifying because it felt so real. If you want a book where you really want to get into the character's head, like you want to like be living in their head and seeing all the processes that are going on inside, both good and bad. Actually, it's funny, this is written by Olga Tokarczuk, and the main character's name in this is Olga. You get to know Olga so well. You get to know all of her. You know all of her thoughts. You know exactly what she's feeling at every moment about this thing. And it's honestly terrifying because she starts to kind of lose it a bit. And honestly, I don't blame her. She also has 2 kids. Like, that makes it infinitely harder that she has these 2 people she has to care for and a dog. And her husband is just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm gone. I'll come and see the kids every so often, and I also want them to come start seeing me at my house. But like, I'm not even going to really explain what's going on. So of course she's kind of losing it a bit. When this came out, apparently everyone in Italy was just shocked by this. Like, it was a shocking book. And I see why, because Ferrante isn't just like, oh yes, this poor woman, oh, I'm going to make her into this like totally tragic character and you're going to 100% relate to her and 100% side with her. She said things and did things that you were like, girl, I don't know if I do that. Or, that did not paint her in a good light. But that's what made it so real. Like, she was really showing every side to this woman and all of the ugliness that comes with this woman in these days of abandonment. Like, this is what it would be like for this woman. Because she did things in here where I was like, oh, that's ugly. Like, that's really not cute. She starts to sort of neglect her children. She has a very contentious relationship with the dog, which is significant because the dog was something the husband always wanted and she never wanted the dog. And then, of course, he's just like, oh, well, I'm out now, and just doesn't take the dog with him. So she has a very contentious relationship with the dog, the thoughts she has about herself, about her children, about the woman that the husband leaves her for, which isn't a super spoiler. You can kind of see that coming from a mile away. So I will put it here. the thoughts she has about her. Like, you get the full picture of what she's thinking of, and you're like, oh yeah, that's not good. But that's what made it so engaging, and that's what made it, I was like, no, this feels real. Like, I almost can relate to it more because I know that I would probably have similar feelings. I'm not a perfect person. I consider myself a pretty open-minded, generous person, and I consider myself someone who, if someone did this to me, I'd say, well, screw you, I'm going to keep moving on. But the fact that she was trying to do that was also so vulnerable. I'm like, no, that is real. That's probably actually what I would be like. I'd be like, I don't care, but I'd be like, the prose in this. I said before with My Brilliant Friend that Ferrante is someone who can write kind of simply on top, but there's a lot going on underneath. So this book predates the Neapolitan novels, the My Brilliant Friend novels. I just feel like the prose in this was so intricate and so lush, and also like played little tricks on your mind. Like, she really, to really get you into Olga's mind, you were with her in how her thoughts started to shift. It made her almost an unreliable narrator, which we love. We love unreliable narrators. There was a friend of hers who was a friend of the couple, like a friend of her and her husband's, that she calls when this all goes down, and she's trying to kind of mine info from this friend, like, what is he up to? Where is he living now? Who is he with? This friend is being like a little reticent, a little like, oh, because I think she just didn't really want to take sides, though. Okay. And so she starts to be like, well, this friend was always deceitful, and this friend always, like, and this friend is definitely helping him out. Like, he is telling her not to speak to me. And so then when she refers to this friend later, she, like, refers to this friend as being that way. And you're like, no, that's just your perception that your friend is being that way. You actually don't know if your friend is the one that's, you know, giving him things about you, or he's telling her to be a certain way. You don't actually know that as a reader for fact. You're only following Olga's perception of it, so you then are siding with her. But there was just subtle ways that Ferrante did that throughout the novel that you were like, no, actually, me as a person on the outside in this reading this, I don't know if that's real. I think it really is just coming from her and what she's creating in the absence of having no information, which happens often. Like, conspiracy theories often come from there being a lack of information, so people then go, oh, well, it has to be this, and it has to be this, and they fill in their own blanks, which she was doing a lot. He was like, I bet he's doing this right now, and I bet it this, blah, 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 but it just became pure fact in her mind. But the way Ferrante wrote that was, so good. The way this ends, too, I thought was kind of beautiful, because it's over the span, I'd say, of like a couple months, and the kind of conclusions she comes to, like, she's gone through a full arc and has really thought it through. She is not the same person as she was at the beginning of the book. This is an event that totally changed her and has kind of warped her thinking and made her like a little bit more of a, like, I wouldn't say paranoid, but she just is someone who is just a little bit not trusting of her own perceptions, not trusting of herself. This event has done that, and I found that to be so, like, written so well and so believable and so gut-wrenching. Like, this was a gut-wrenching book. I think anyone who's in a committed relationship who reads this would just be like, it also, he sucks. I'm sorry, the husband sucks. Can we talk about the husband? Yeah, he sucked. At first I was like, you know, maybe he has a good reason. Maybe it's one of those like, no, it's not you, it's me. But to do that, especially when you have been married, which is a commitment, and you have 2 kids, and then you just don't give any explanation, you're like, I gotta go. And to make it worse, he's like maybe in his like early 40s. He takes up with a 20-year-old woman. But that's what makes it so fascinating too, because obviously, even from the outset, just being on her side when he says, no, I'm leaving you and I'm not going to give you any info on this, you side with her right away, because I'm sorry, that's just so awful. But then as the book goes on, you're further siding with her because you're getting more information about him, and you're realizing more and more, oh, he's garbage. Like, he's just not a nice human at all. Especially because you're getting, like, other things about what he's like at work, or you get other things just about him as a person. But it's not like she's a good person either. Like, she does things that are, like, not great and are questionable, and yet you still side with her. Like, you're still with her, and she's still sympathetic. So for Ferrante to be able to do that is so good. It is so masterful. I bet you people read this and was like, no, she's terrible. She's terrible. And I'm sure there are people who somehow justify that he should have left her or that he was right to do so, or not to get on a soapbox, but people will always back the wrong people in situations like these and in other situations. So I'm sure people have their justifications, but the fact that I think for probably a lot of readers and what made this so uncomfortable, the fact that you're still siding with her because she is a victim in this case, but she also does things to victimize other people or to victimize other things. And for you to be like, no, but I'm still with you, and that's like revealing gross parts of humanity and gross parts of ourselves, and I have to sit with that. Pick this up. Pick this up. Pick this up. I will warn you, it's heavy. Like, this is heavy, this is sad, this is just frustrating. It's a lot. So I would not pick this up if you are in a breakup, if you are in like a very vulnerable spot. I would maybe caution this is not the right time. I am very lucky in my life. I do feel very comforted. Even reading this book, I was like, there's no way my partner would do this. As I kept going, I was like, there's no way my partner would do this to me. So I feel very lucky that I do feel very secure in my relationship. So I picked this up, read it, finished it, and was kind of like, but then I like told my boyfriend about it and we curled up and I was like, great, I feel secure. So picked this up with caution, but this was excellent. And I liked My Brilliant Friend, but I don't remember being like, but now I'm like, oh, Elena Ferrante, like I understand the obsession. I understand the writing. I get it, because this was brilliant. So, last book I read, I literally finished it the last day of July. I was so happy to be able to like squeeze that in. Oh, that's me, by the way. This book was called I Cheerfully Refuse by Leif Enger. This was a totally random pick, and I feel like I say that a lot, but when I mean this was random, this was so random. I hadn't listened to an audiobook in a long time, and I often like listening to one when I'm going to and from work in my car, and then I often play it when I'm cooking. If I'm walking around, sometimes I'll put it on. So I hadn't listened to one in a while, and I was like, you know what, I think it's time for an audiobook. So I go on Libby, which you should use Libby for your audiobooks. It's fantastic, and it supports your local library. So I'm like looking through and I'm like, what can Chicago Public Library offer me in the way of an audiobook where I don't have to wait? I don't have to place a hold for it. What can I get right now? And I'm looking, I'm like, nothing's really speaking to me. I'm like, okay. And then I found this book and it has a beautiful cover. And I was like, that seems, and the title is cool. I Cheerfully Refuse. So I was like, the title's cool. The cover's really pretty. It almost looks like a romantic Edvard Munch painting. So I was like, well, what's up with this? And so I read the description and I was like, you know what, like, why not? It's available to borrow right now, like, let's do it. So this is a brand new release. This is probably the newest book that I've read in a very long time, because I usually like to read the old and dusty and crusty. It was published in April 2024. It's a great little book. It's about these folks living on Lake Michigan. I'm almost certain they live in Minnesota, or if not, like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They live basically on Lake Superior. And it's in like a not too distant future. It's a bit dystopian, or like what feels like the beginning of dystopia, kind of the beginning of environmental and societal collapse. It's an increasingly illiterate society, and it's about this man named Rainey who lives with his wife Lark, and Lark runs a bookstore. Rainey's a musician, and they live in this nice little town called Icebridge. They're just kind of living their life very quietly. But then something happens. Lark is lost, unfortunately, which was a very sad loss, and not really a spoiler. They kind of tell you that at the beginning. And Rainey then, through his grief, and also because someone or something might be pursuing him, he decides to take their boat named Flower. He decides to take it on Lake Superior and just like start sailing and just kind of go. And while he's out there, he's kind of searching for his wife. He's kind of searching for her spirit. And he's also just trying to see like what's out there for him, because he's kind of lost his purpose. And along the way, he like meets the people in this dystopian society, for good or for bad. And this was a really, just a nice little book. Honestly, it was perfect for audiobook. I would have liked to have read it in the physical print. Like, I think I would enjoy it. But it was nice as an audiobook because it was realism, but it had like, almost had a magical realism quality to it, but not so hard that it did really feel magical. There was just like a little mythical arc to it that felt really nice. The writing was really beautiful. It wasn't poetic, but it would have moments where it waxed a bit poetic. And it just like, the writing flowed really easily. Like, everything flowed into itself very nicely. It's not like I was like, wait, what are we doing now? What is this? Like, it just felt like this nice story that almost like you're on a lake, like kind of just like flows along. The characters in this were really good. Rainey was a great character. I kind of imagined him as this kind of like big, kind of burly guy. Lark, for some reason, I casted in my mind as Andy McDowell. I don't know why. That is just like her in Groundhog Day. I like kind of imagined she had that vibe because she's just such a kind character. She was so sweet. She was so generous. Like, had a very generous spirit. And so I just cast her in my mind, like, as that role. And the characters were so alive and so well done. And he was able to world build without it being overbearing. The way he described things and the way he set up the world of Lake Superior in this not so distant future was so interesting. Also, the fact that it was like a nearly illiterate society, a lot of people couldn't read. Lark's bookstore had a bombing attempt happen on it. The fact she even like had a bookstore was like an act of defiance, and I was amazed that she wasn't hurt earlier for having such a like defiant business. Finding books was really difficult. Rainey himself like could read, but it was very difficult for him. That for like a reader and like in a book is just horrifying. Also in the book they had just, this was like only mentioned once, but I like really thought about it. They had just elected in the country their first illiterate president, which I was like, It's not the first dystopian book I have read this year. I read Parable of the Sower earlier this year, which is in my February wrap-up. And that book felt like, yes, society collapsed maybe about like 20, 30 years ago, and it's progressed pretty poorly, and it's getting really scary and really dangerous. I don't think these two worlds existed at the same time. These are two different types of dystopian books, but I feel like I Cheerfully Refuse belongs in the camp of like, things are just starting to get really bad. Like, it's just on the onset of it being bad. Not that it wasn't threatening, like I was like, no, that there's some bad stuff going on, not necessarily in Rainey's nice little town, but as he starts to venture out, you see that things are getting much worse, but it feels like it hadn't quite advanced to the level of Parable of the Sower yet. So this was dystopian, but it was very quietly dystopian. It was not, when I've talked about in my book to movie videos, it wasn't like the movie version of The Giver where it was like, dun 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 dun, gotta fight the government and Hunger Games. No, it was very, very quiet dystopian. Again, the world building he did was very, very subtle. It was very subtle, very light-handed. You could tell he wasn't super interested in making this wasn't a sci-fi book at all. Just, he was saying things are getting bad. But that also, this book at the very end, I thought the ending was beautiful. It was very beautiful and very hopeful. Parable of the Sower, not hopeful. Octavia Butler did not have much hope. I could talk about reading subtext. I could read that subtext. This one felt a lot more hopeful. There's like this beautiful moment where he like thinks kind of absently about his wife, and he just takes that boat out and he's like looking out into the horizon and like seeing how the lights shift. And it's just him basically saying like, I'm gonna keep going on. We're gonna keep going on. And there was something really, really beautiful in that, because he kind of found a new community to join and this community was very invested in helping people and helping people grow and like being there for one another. And he was like, that is the way I'm gonna go. And the last line of the book was, like, he's thinking about a dance that's going to happen later. He's like, maybe I'll dance. And I don't know, that just felt very like, maybe I'll do this thing. He fully has processed his wife's loss, and he's just like, we're moving forward. And there was something really gorgeous in that. I wouldn't say this was 5 stars. I was not so in love with this, but this was definitely a great audiobook. It was very beautifully done. Different from what I usually read. This is not usually a book I would pick up, but again, I was just intrigued by everything about it. The title, I Cheerfully Refuse, is a great title. The cover was great, and then the description, I was like, we might as well. I also love a nautical tale. Again, we love a nautical tale, and a lot of this book took place on a boat, and so I was like, we love. It was very, very nice. At parts very dark. It wasn't too bleak, where I felt like, oh god, like, we can't get through this. Actually, of all the books I read this month, it was probably the least bleak of all of them. So I would recommend this. I would totally recommend this. Listen to it on audiobook. That's the only thing. The audiobook narrator, he did a great job. I know he's like a pretty well-known actor. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. The voices he did for women was weird. He'd kind of talk like this, which was weird. I don't know. I kind of like when they have an audiobook and they have different readers, or they have different readers for different genders. And again, he did a great job, and like he did vary the voices enough so I knew who was talking when. But with the women characters, it just like kind of threw me off. Like he just sounded a little weird. That's just my thing with audiobooks too. Like I'm picky about audiobooks, and if the reader sounds a little off, or he says words in a weird way, I get very like, I don't know. I would try to pick this book up. I would try to like read it, and I feel like if I read it, I would even get more out of it. But that's also because I am a visual learner through and through. Sometimes things go into my head and out the other, and I don't remember anything. I'm not an auditory learner. I did like this book. I really liked it. So I Cheerfully Refuse. I recommend. I haven't heard anyone talk about it. I literally just picked it up out of the blue, but I am glad that I did. So those are all the books that I read. I do just want to give just quick little updates on the books that I am currently reading. So no audiobooks right now since I just finished that one, but I might try to pick something up again. I am reading a nonfiction book again, this time very different from Open Veins of Latin America. I did want something very narrative, and I am definitely getting that with The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It's been on my list a long time. I picked this up in a little free library. I have been wanting to read this book for flippin' ever. This is really good. Really, really well written. Humanizes Henrietta Lacks to the point that I'm like, yeah, she was a real human being, and is also describing the medical aspects of the book in a way that's very comprehensive and understandable, but not patronizing. That's not like, you don't know anything about cells. She's explaining it very well. If you don't know this book, this is about Henrietta Lacks, who was a woman in Baltimore in the 50s, a black woman whose cells were used, cells from her tumor in her cervix were harvested, and then they kept reproducing. Often cells that were kept in cultures would die out, but hers kept reproducing and kept living. So the medical community basically took a hold of that and have used her cells for all sorts of research, all sorts of medical breakthroughs. However, the woman whose cells they did not get her permission to use these cells for anything. They didn't get her family's permission once she passed away unfortunately, from cervical cancer. So this woman has helped countless thousands of people because of the scientific discoveries coming from her cells, but her family has never seen any benefits from it. And so the author, Rebecca Skloot, basically is telling the story of her, telling the story of like trying to get her family to talk about it and trying to get the family help with all that's come from the benefit of these cells. And it's just extremely well researched, it's well written. It kind of flips between going from the 50s, going from when these cells were harvested and discovered, going through Henrietta's life, and going to when Rebecca is like trying to get this book together. So it's really well written. I'm really enjoying this. And then of course I'm reading the big boy. I'm reading War and Peace. This is so good so far. I read probably the first 100 pages and I was like, oh, so this is the best book of all time. Everyone has said it, and now I 100% get it. This is the best book of all time. This so far is so good. I really can't stop reading this book. For how big it is and how old it is, for it to be this compulsive where I'm just like, I'll just read one more chapter. No, I'll just read one more chapter. It's incredible. Obviously, if you don't know War and Peace, this is about various people in Russian nobility and in the Russian army and historical figures during the Napoleonic Wars. It's just amazing. Like, it's just so good. I can't not read this book. I have to say, I am more invested when it is talking about characters who are not in the war, like who are in their parlors and at these balls. I find those scenes to be a bit more interesting than the war scenes. The men who are in the war and the politics of all of the officers and generals and the emperor. I find that to be a little less engaging, but still so good. The way Tolstoy gets us to know these characters and care about these characters so quickly is unmatched. Like, it's so good. I'm like, there's a ton of characters, but I somehow already know who everybody is. I'm getting who everybody is in relation to one another, and there's ones who I'm already like, I know what that one's like, don't like that one. Andre, don't like him. But then there's ones where I'm like, no, I like you. Natasha, I like Natasha. So the way he's able to do that so quickly and so concisely get these characters in these little scenes where I know what they're all like is just, it's so good. It's so, so good. And I just know it's gonna get devastating. I know it's gonna get devastating. I know it is, but I don't know how, like, I really don't know any of the events of the book, besides the fact of what is in history, like what these battles are. I kind of have an idea. But like between these characters, I really don't know. So I feel like I am in for, I'm gonna get my heart broken. I feel like I am. But so far my favorites are Natasha, I love Maria Bolkonskaya. The relationship she has with her father, what the heck is going on there? That guy is weird. Nikolai Bolkonsky. Something's up there. I don't really know. I don't want to go into it. I like Boris, but I feel like he's kind of like, just kind of there. I have a feeling he's not really going to have as much of an impact. I like Pierre, but is he gonna get better? I feel like he's just someone who's like, I'm kind of going along. Oh, okay, I inherited my father's estate. Oh, I guess I gotta marry this woman. I'm like, get a spine, Pierre. Figure out what you're doing over there. Now, I am at page 282. I am in book 1, part 3, chapter 13. So if that gives you anything, that's where I'm at. We're basically right before the Battle of Austerlitz. I love it. I love it! It's so good. I mean, this is gonna be a 5-star, I can already tell, but I just know that my heart is gonna get taken from me. One of the best books of all time, I can already tell. Those are my books from July, and then a little bit of reading updates for you. I'm excited. I'm excited for August. I've got some good books lined up. I'm hoping to maybe finish War and Peace in August, though I have a feeling it might run into September. I'm reading some good books for my book club. I think I'm just gonna pick up some like nice light reads because War and Peace is so heavy. I'm not really planning to pick up anything from the 19th century. It's probably gonna be some nice lighter 20th century reads. And by lighter, I mean not 1,000 pages, but probably heavy in content, because that's my trend. That's my brand. Thank you so much for watching this video. Your support means everything. Thank you to anyone who's a new subscriber. Welcome. Come hang out. And if you like books, if you like classics, if you like reading updates, if you like book hauls, if you like just some general tomfoolery from a little white brunette girl in Chicago, I mean, this is it. This is what you subscribe to. So you can like this video, you can subscribe, you can share this video, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. Stay cool in this summer heat. I hope you're having a great summer, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!